Selamat datang di channel video kami. Jangan lupa subscribe untuk update video-video terbaru kami.
The story of Indonesia's rack lines does not end there. Back in central Java, small rack locos similar to those Sumatra found inadequate had been supplied for a rack line near Ambarawa, part of a branch linking the north coast with the provincial capital of Jogja. Traffic failed to develop as hoped, so the original locomotives were never replaced, 4 of them still being in service when we visited in 1974. The rack line had closed by then, but the little engines were used for local trains on the remaining line to Ambarawa over a causeway through the flood plains. In order to film a train on the rack section, we arranged a special. Engine number 3 had its pinion carefully checked for alignment and was then loaded up with wood while steam was raised. A vigorous start was made from Ambarawa's old station, our train consisting of the locomotive and an old inspection saloon. After 3 years of disuse, the track appeared to be in good shape, and the village children didn't miss this rare opportunity to ride their local train. The rack equipment on the locomotive was also on good form, producing a busy display of mechanical motion that seemed quite unrelated to the leisurely pace of the train. Fortunately, the line was kept in a usable state, and this scenic trip later became established as a regular excursion ride. When we visited Java again in 1992, we were delighted to find old number 2503 still in steam for special trips on the rack. The locomotive depot was no longer in regular operation, as the branch line across the causeway had closed. Ambarawa station had become the centrepiece for an open-air museum, a sort of locomotive's garden of rest. It was attractively laid out, but the exhibits looked a bit forlorn, having already been exposed for some years to Java's tropical rains. It proved the ideal opportunity to see some old favourites and check out some of the engines we'd missed during our filming trip back in 1974. An old Bayer Peacock 460 from Cepu was there, and one of the C-27 tanks we'd seen on suburban service in Jakarta. One of the West Java Malays had pride of place by the station platform, and a handsome Prussian B-51 440, a type that, although still reportedly in use, had eluded us 18 years before. Another one we'd missed had an interesting history. This D-51 class came from the last batch of 282s, originally built in Germany in 1918 for the Hejaz Railway in Syria. The defeat of the ruling Turks in that year made the locos redundant, but the Germans managed to find another customer on the other side of the world, selling them to the Dutch for the Java Railways. Being in rather a remote location, the Ambarawa Museum is a little short of visitors, but at least the engines have been saved from the scrapyard. Another locomotive museum has now been established at Taman Mini in Jakarta, using all the engines that remained in store around the west of the island. Moving now to the east of Java, we come to Indonesia's second largest city, Surabaya, with a population of over 2 million. A major industrial centre with a large harbour, it has for centuries past been the principal port and centre of trade for the Java seas, a focal point for shipping on the old trade routes between the Indian Ocean and the Pacific. Even today, a large section of the harbour is given over to the traditional sailing vessels that still ply the straits to Sulawesi and the Moluccas. These old Makassar schooners, or pinisi, are used for the bread and butter cargoes of the region, such as timber and tea. Methods of local transport have in many cases remained as timeless as the boats. Naturally enough, a place of this importance was an early target for the railway builders in the late 19th century. The Dutch colonial administration decided that what the locals needed to get down to the docks was a steam tramway of the sort that was common in the Netherlands at that time. It was duly opened in 1889. When we went there in 1974, we couldn't believe our luck when we found it still running. The Javanese had remained faithful to their old tram for 85 years, and it had long outlived a more modern electric version installed in the 20s. The line started at Ujung next to the harbour, where the scene appeared unchanged since the tramway had been built. Compared to the schooners moored alongside, the 19th century tram could still pretend to be in the vanguard of progress. Neat colonial villas lined the streets, where the steam tram bustled through this little Holland in the tropics. Surabaya had become the last city in the world to be served by a steam tram. The tram paused briefly at Kebon Rojo station, little more than a shack, but still boasting a station master and a clerk. The tram was mainly used by market stallholders from the island of Madura, who would have found it difficult to transport their wares by bus. The steam tram depot at Monocromo dated from 1913 and housed the last two survivors. As we filmed number 1240 being loaded up with wood for its next trip, we were unaware of the local children monopolising our microphone, a case of better heard than seen.
Hello? 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 Hello?
Shortage of wood fuel meant that locally mined dusty brown coal was also used to fire up these tiny machines. As with the rest of Java's locomotives, the Dutch built a few prototype tram engines themselves, but then had the series production built elsewhere, this time in Britain, at the Bayer Peacock Works in Manchester. Conveniently for the locomotive historian, one example of each remained to the end. At the end of his shift, the driver dutifully drove into a shed without doors or roof, more as a ritual than for any practical reason, since no protection at all was offered to its antique occupants. The garish blue paint and modern advertising did little to conceal the fact that engine and coaches together formed a perfect period train from the turn of the century. Economic development and local road improvements made it inevitable that the tram would soon become redundant. And in due course, in 1977, the Surabaya steam tram ran for the last time. But while it still ran, it ruled the Surabaya marketplace, and the rickshaws or pet jacks kept well clear as the tram chuffed importantly by. The tram still had priority and faced the traffic head-on down a one-way street just to make the point. Nowadays, all that remains of Surabaya's steam trams are these abandoned rails through the shanty near the docks. Smart modern buses with a short wheelbase suited to Madura's twisting roads now run direct from Surabaya city centre to the islands via a new roll-on, roll-off ferry, symbolic of Indonesia's considerable economic growth in recent years. Motorcycle commuters now outnumber the rickshaws on the road to the docks, although some of the locals still use more traditional ways of making the crossing. On the mainline railways, the system has been pruned and modernised in recent years, enabling it to function well as a lifeline for both freight and passenger service.